Last April, this past April, the United Church Observer, along with a number of different sponsors, including Walrus Publications, held a Walrus talk in Toronto on spirituality. I'd like to share with you a small excerpt of that talk as our first piece of wisdom that comes from our colleague in ministry in the United Church, Reverend Greta Vosper, who spoke about spirituality and her take on belief and where we move beyond belief. And so here's about 7 minutes or so of Greta Vosper's talk from this past April. Let's hear a bit of ancient wisdom from the book of Matthew in chapter 21. What do you think? A man had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go and work in the vineyard today." He answered, "I will not." But later he changed his mind and went. The father went to the second and said the same, and he answered, "I'll go, sir." But he didn't end up going. Which of the 2 did the will of the father? Those who were listening said to Jesus, "The first one." And Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, all the ones you consider less than may be experiencing the spiritual life more fully than you." This is an old spiritual lesson told by the early followers of the Jesus tradition. May we find wisdom for our living. We've been pondering over these spring and summer weeks the various challenges in our living, the various sidetracks from a positive spiritual life. We've explored things like entitlement, apathy, arrogance, fear, to name just a few. Today I'm deciding to stand on a rather thin branch of our traditions tree today, trusting that should I fall, I know you'll catch me. Today it's time to talk about how the very notion of religious belief can be and is a sidetrack to our good and positive spiritual life. So the first question is, what do we mean by belief? That's the question I'm pursuing today. We're rooted in a tradition of belief. Written beliefs have always been a part of the Christian tradition. Likewise, always been an attempt to have a group of people give intellectual assent to something that defines and limits the boundaries of thought. Here's what's okay to think. Outside of that, maybe not. Really, since the 4th century, and that's a long time ago, codified creeds and statements became a way for the church to exert power, to delineate orthodoxy, and thus define who is in and who is out. Some might say we've come a long way. It's the 21st century. And yet, the United Church's most recent attempt in 2006 is called the Song of Faith. They thought they'd make the creed a little more palatable by putting it in a poem form. But it is still an attempt at etching transient and personal spiritual wisdom into written dogma. It still follows that age-old desire to codify religious belief, to say, here's where we stand, here's where it's acceptable to think and believe, and outside of that, not so much. Now, if you have to pick among all the church's creeds, I guess this one would be my pick. However, it still at its root cause has the problem of trying to delineate and codify and write down exactly what it is we believe. Here are a few of the more disturbing examples. And it's unfair to pick them out. I'll give you that. You could read all 35 stanzas yourself. But here's part of the problem, is that when we make statements such as, with the church through the ages, we speak of God as one and triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We speak of God as Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, God, Christ, and Spirit. Boy, the church likes threes. Here's another one. But death was not the last word for Jesus. God raised Jesus from the dead, turning sorrow into joy, despair into hope. We sing of Jesus raised from the dead. By becoming flesh in Jesus, God makes all things new. In Jesus' crucifixion, God bears the sin, grief, and suffering of the world. It's this document that was used in last week's grilling of Greta Vosper, a United Church minister who seeks, like we do, to a more expansive and values-focused spirituality. It's these words that were held up to her and said, how do you respond? It's these statements of belief that were used in Toronto in what I would say, my opinion, a shameful process for our United Church that responds to squeaky-wheeled voices who don't like and are threatened by certain understandings and ways of expressing and evolving spirituality. It's this document that was the source of the questions asked of her and whether she is a, quote, effective minister. Now, whenever we use written and static documents, rather than dialogue and conversation in trying to understand one another, we have a problem. Now, you'd think the church would learn. The church has been through centuries of experience. And for once, that's not hyperbole. Centuries of experience with dismal results. Burnings at the stake, defrockings, beheadings, wars, schisms, extremisms, and every manner of violence known to humanity. As a result of the church using written and static documents to judge one another. And this isn't to mention the more subtle in our time ways that the church enacts this power, by subtle exclusions, rejections, unwelcoming attitudes. Find a church down the street for you and your kind. For as much good as the writings of any text might inspire, and every dogmatic belief statement has done to promote social justice or positive change, it has just as frequently been used, or perhaps more frequently been used, to uphold evil, unjust, harmful, violent programs and empires. Our culture, I can't speak for our 21st century culture, I can only speak for me, but I sense that our culture is ready to be done with these kinds of sweeping statements that define what life should be, that delineate what should be believed about what and whom. What more evidence do we need than approximately 65 years of decline in organized religion and its institutions? That across the board, left, center, right, doesn't matter, the church as an institution is increasingly irrelevant to the world. Just as a little example, my questions in the fall of 2010, when I first joined you as a minister in this congregation, we negotiated a service of covenanting, a gathering that we had to welcome me. And the powers that be in the Alberta Northwest Conference offered us a template for that service, indicating that we could change anything we liked. Great, we thought. There's a lot to change. And then they said, except the questions asked of you, Chris. So, like it or not, in order for me to hold my breath, in order to be with you, I was asked these questions. Do you believe in God who has created and is creating, who has come in Jesus, the Word made flesh to reconcile and make new, who works in us and others by the Spirit? Yes or no? Do you believe that God is calling you to the work of a minister in this pastoral charge, and do you accept that holy calling? Oy. The questions that we have to ask are, why do you want to know? The question is, what is the purpose of those questions? Is it for intellectual assent? Is it to make sure that you're inside the circle? The church always exerts the power that way. When they ask if I believe in certain things, what are they trying to ask? Does it matter that I declare that a man who lived 2,000 years ago is the Word made flesh? Which is just a fancy way of saying that Jesus was God in a human body. They ask for an intellectual answer. They ask for whether or not I think in the right way. On a checklist of appropriate or acceptable ideas, I must assent to these ones, and then they will be checked off. Now, instead, we can throw out the old, but what do we put in its place? I have an idea. Instead, we should be asking and having conversations around what informs your behavior. What am I giving my time and energy to in order that I make of my life a positive influence in the world? How about this one? What standards do I use every day to ponder my relationships, my financial decisions, my standing up for another? What motivates me to work for justice or peace in whatever small or big ways I'm able? I'm sure there are many more we could all come up with. There are greater minds in this room than me. But it's only these kinds of questions that will get us past this antiquated and irrelevant focus on beliefs. Could you imagine coming here every Sunday morning to talk about what you think about the belief in the Trinity? Could you imagine coming here every Sunday to discuss the fact that Jesus was or wasn't God? What would be the point? So many churches, even within our United Church, though, need to get serious and ask themselves that very question. What's the point? Now for this quote. John Spong, in a book he wrote a few years ago, Eternal Life, A New Vision, he says this: "The task of religion is not to turn us into proper believers, it is to deepen the personal within us, to embrace the power of life, to expand our consciousness in order that we might see things that eyes do not normally see." It's a really good way to say it. When we talk about belief, we're trying to get at what is true for us, what inspires us, what helps us to live better lives. And the challenge is, and I borrow a phrase again from Greta, the challenge is being rooted in a set of codified beliefs is that the reality of the moving target of truth. Open up our texts and we can find writings that call us to hate. We can find texts that point us to exclusion and division, just as much as we find life-giving texts calling us to love and include. And then when we close that book and we see written on the front, what's on the title of almost every book that every Bible? Holy Bible. Try to find a Bible that doesn't say Holy Bible. Calling these texts holy, finding something we agree with and saying this must be true for all time because this is what our holy writings say. Truth is a moving target. We can't presume that something will always be true. To quote her again from the Walrus Talk, there are things that are true for us children that we then outgrow. There are coping mechanisms that are helpful when there are no other answers, but when others are found, the first ones are no longer needed. I'd say that really this is the whole point. If you read it with 21st century eyes toward spiritual wisdom, it's the whole point of the Garden of Eden story. Open the first page of the Bible, and you get a story about the Garden of Eden. And the whole point that it says at the very beginning is that we mature, at different ages and stages, but we mature and we find wisdom and knowledge of good and evil. We find adult things that we need and put childish rules away so that we can leave the garden. And that's the whole point, is leaving the garden. We need to mature and grow up in order to do it. And we can't hold to some universal and written truth because it will change. Our American friends, as someone reminded me this morning, our American friends will struggle with this for a lot longer now. Something written in their Constitution that may not apply to life in the 21st century. And yet we hold to those universal and written truths as though they're for all time. Our truth changes as our lives do. So what we're reaching for then is about giving our heart to things that we find important. If we've been around here for any length of time, we know this, that it's about the values we commit to. It's about stating our intentions, not just to ourselves, but with each other, so that we can hold each other accountable to how we intend to live. Agreeing to something different than just a list of propositions that may be meaningless. I mean, this father with two sons. One says he'll do something and he doesn't. The other says no and then he does it. Which one complied with his father's wishes? That simple story from centuries ago was a condemnation of empty words. It doesn't matter what you say you'll do. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what religious box you checked on your census form. What matters is what you do. And there are multiple examples of these kinds of stories in spiritual writings for those who emphasize beliefs over behavior, dogma over lived values, harsh words for them at every turn. So Sharon Salzberg, in a book called Faith, writes this, which is a miracle. I found this quote because I would never usually pick up a book called Faith. But anyway, Sharon Salzberg writes, "For our spirits to be alive and to deepen, we need to use our power to inquire, to wonder, to explore our experience, to see what is true for ourselves. It means we have to be inquisitive, eager, self-confident, with a capacity to probe and question, open to the messiness, the discordance, the ambivalence, and the vitality of questioning. Only this way will our lives be our own and not something borrowed." It's that last phrase that got me. Only by opening to this messy questioning will our lives be our own and not something borrowed. As the last of 6 children, I get the significance of that line. Something my own. We can't inherit some other belief that's not ours, some idea, some set of values. All we can do is struggle to figure out what is meaningful for us. To bring together what we think, what we feel, what we experience, and how that impacts the way we see the world, and ultimately the decisions we'll make for how to live in this life. I'm quoting some controversial people today, so I might as well continue. Richard Dawkins says these words, in looking externally to our beliefs in a God or gods, he says, there's something infantile. Richard Dawkins loves words like infantile. There's something infantile in the presumption that somebody else, or someone else, or something else has a responsibility to give your life meaning and point. The truly adult view, by contrast, is that our life is as meaningful, as full, and as wonderful as we choose to make it. Which puts us right in this zone, personal responsibility area. One of the great things about being part of a community like this one, like Southminster Steinhauer, is that we are reaching toward that inquisitive, eager, self-confident capacity to probe and question, knowing that it's messy and it's discordant, and the vitality of questioning sends us to new places we may not have thought we'd go. But spiritual awareness is being honest with ourselves, intellectually with what makes sense to us, not inheriting something else that when we read it doesn't jive with the worldview we have. With when we read it, we say, that's nonsense. I want something that is meaningful to me, that expresses my view of the world and the values I hold. So, even though it's messy and uncomfortable, this is the human journey, right? It can't be borrowed or adopted. It can't be inherited or assumed. It's yours and mine alone, and yet shared in safe places like this. It's the process by which we engage our hearts and our minds and our experiences coming together to form us as the spiritual beings we are, as Greta painted in her talk, to create and build this land of empathy and compassion. So let's lay aside the statements, the sentences, the creeds, the songs, anything in our life that says, you better think like this. Let's lay them aside. They're no good to our spirits. They give us a path of our forebears, and that can be valuable, but only as much as we recognize it's the path of our forebears. It may or may not be ours. May we continue making that journey from believing to the challenge of awareness and being open and honest about the values that inspire us. As we work to build that dream, we'll hold each other up on this thin branch so that it doesn't break on us. And we'll work together to make it so in so many ways. Let's be together in strengthening our intentions with words that are inspired by old ones, but made new because our truth may change. May we pray these words together. We embrace the sacredness of all life as we work toward the vision of the world as it could be. We seek an awareness of the very moment, ensuring only that we and our neighbors have enough for today. We pray that we might let go of all things that's guilt and embrace relationships of trust, offering and receiving forgiveness as a way to freedom. May we live examined lives, inspired to find meaning and purpose in our living, working to transform every challenge into an opportunity to grow and thrive. May it ever be so. after this time together, we go from here, and our prayer is that we go from here inspired to live lives that have meaning, to seek truth that works and that inspires you in your daily life. May we go in this place inspired that this light that unites us all will continue to be with us wherever we are, to know that it strengthens us, to know that we're not on the branch by ourselves. And we go, living that truth into our week.